Okay, well, we're here today in front of Portcullis House, the high security modern building near the Houses of Parliament, where many MPs, including Philip Davies, have their offices, and where much of the business of Parliament actually takes place. We've been supporters of Philip because of his advocacy for men and boys over many years, especially since 2015, when he overcame the attempt by Jess Phillips on the Backbench Business Committee to deny him the opportunity to host the first ever debate on men's issues in Parliament on International Men's Day that year. There's a link to the video of Jess Phillips' infamous attempt on that committee in the description box.
In 2016, Philip gave a well-received talk at our second international conference on men's issues in London, which pleasingly later had journalists at The Guardian foaming at the mouth in a doomed effort to get Theresa May to withdraw the Conservative whip from him. He's hosted or contributed to all 3 International Men's Day debates since 2016, including the one he hosted last Thursday, in which he made a groundbreaking statement concerning male genital mutilation and female genital mutilation. We'll be talking to him about that and other important issues.
Philip, thank you so much for giving us some of your time today. I'd like to start by putting on the record our appreciation for your advocacy for men and boys over the years, as well as the appreciation of the men's rights movement internationally. You're pretty well the only parliamentarian in the world who ever talked publicly about the many human rights abuses that men and boys suffer. I wonder if you could start with your statement about male genital mutilation and female genital mutilation in your introduction to the International Men's Day debate last Thursday. We believe this to be the first time not only that the term male genital mutilation has gone into Hansard, but also the issue of the illegality of it. Can you tell us what reaction you had from other MPs after the debate for raising the issue?
I didn't really have any reaction, to be perfectly honest, which was quite striking in many respects, and I was actually quite surprised that I actually thought the minister was actually quite helpful. She didn't dismiss the issue out of hand and say it wasn't an issue. She sort of said she'd look into it and get back to me. So I'm waiting for her to look into it and get back to me, to be perfectly honest.
Okay.
So I was surprised it wasn't dismissed as a non-issue, and I thought that was quite interesting.
Okay, we were rather puzzled that it was Victoria Atkins rather than Penny Mordaunt, I think. Any idea why she was the responding minister?
Yeah, the Secretaries of State never respond to Westminster Hall debates. It's always a junior minister that responds to them.
Okay. Thank you for that.
So you and your colleagues must have fathers and grandfathers turning up to their constituency offices all the time complaining of brutal treatment by the family courts and denial of access to children and grandchildren. It's without question emotional abuse of children, fathers and grandparents, and a contributor to the male high suicide rate. Do you see the Conservative Party ever again becoming the party of the family? And if so, what changes do you think we would need to see to make that happen?
Yeah, I'm sure it will. I'm sure the Conservative Party will always be more likely to be the party of the family than any other political party. I think that's clear. But yeah, I mean, the premise of your question is right. I do get lots of people who come to my surgeries who are having problem with the family courts. And of course it's not just a male issue, because obviously lots of the men have often remarried, they've got new partners, and so it affects their new partner as well, and in fact occasionally it's not the man who comes to see me, it's actually the new partner of the man who comes to see me about the problem that their partner's suffering at the hands of the family courts. So it is a big issue. It is particularly an issue for parents, usually fathers, who don't get to see their kids and have all sorts of false allegations made about them to try and stop them from seeing the kids. And I think this is a growing problem, to be perfectly honest. This is no doubt that this is a growing problem. The issue of parental alienation is a massive issue. What might the government do about it? I don't know. I don't know, but I think we're quite some way away from action being taken. I think we've just got to raise the issue, to be perfectly honest. I mean, there's usually a sequence of events in Parliament. Nothing happens quickly, but the sequence of events tends to have to start with an issue being raised time and time again with the government, so they accept that there is a problem. And then when they accept there's a problem, there's half a chance they might do something about it. I'm not entirely sure there's any recognition there's a big problem at the moment, and so there's an awful lot of work to be done to actually persuade the government there is a problem here that needs addressing.
Philip, you'll probably recall the TV sitcoms Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister from the 1980s, when the BBC turned out decent comedy. Now, Jim Hacker, you'll recall, was the Minister in the first series and Prime Minister in the second. His permanent secretary was Sir Humphrey Appleby. Now, if Sir Humphrey ever wished Jim Hacker to drop a proposed initiative, he commended him on having the courage to undertake it. Invariably, the initiative would then be dropped. Do you think the poor attendance of MPs for your debate on International Men's Day last Thursday can be attributed to a lack of courage on the part of MPs, or a lack of understanding of men's issues, or a lack of interest in them?
Well, of course, Yes Minister was not a comedy, it was a blueprint for the civil service. It's their training manual, to be perfectly honest. I don't know about the lack of attendance at any debate can't necessarily be taken as meaning anything, to be perfectly frank, because Thursday afternoons are always thinly attended debates, whatever they're on, because lots of MPs have already gone off back to their constituencies for the weekend. There's no votes on a Thursday, so attendance in the House of Commons on a Thursday is pretty slack anyway. Then you've got debates going on in Westminster Hall and the Chamber, which further dilutes the attendance in one or the other. And so it doesn't really. I mean, the number of people who attend a debate it tends to be more about when the debate's on, and rather than the subject of the debate is. So I wouldn't read too much into that. But yes, I mean the broader point's accurate. There is a lack of courage amongst MPs. That certainly is true.
I'd like to turn to your appointment to the Women and Equalities Committee, which outraged Jess Phillips and the other feminists on the committee, and was a big morale booster for the men's rights movement. The committee's overwhelming focus is on women and girls, and even when they pretend to care about issues affecting men and boys, such as with the current mental health consultation exercise, they invariably view them through a feminist lens. Can you explain what your aims were when you sought a position on the committee, and what has been your experience on the committee with respect to getting attention to men's issues?
Well, look, when I applied to go on the committee, I thought to myself that rather than sort of chipping away on the outside about these things, that given that there's always a permanent vacancy on the Women and Equalities Committee, which tells you a lot about how important MPs think that committee is anyway. I mean, there's ever since I've been on it, I think there's always been at least 2 vacancies on the committee that nobody wants to fill. So, I mean, all this talk that it does such important work, I mean, it's the only committee I know of that has permanently got vacancies on it, so it can't be that important, the work it does, or else presumably it'd be full all the time and there'd be competition for places. But so that's an interesting thing in itself. But I thought that, you know, it would be more useful for me to, given that this committee is there, and I may as well go on it and try and put a different perspective on things, because it is a bit like an echo chamber. You know, everyone on there all has the same opinions, and they usually seek evidence from people who just reinforce those opinions. And I thought I might be able to try and, you know, add a different dimension to it. So I've tried, but it is very difficult, because it's very difficult. Being on your own on any committee is a pretty difficult task. I had the same on the Justice Select Committee, funnily enough, when I was on there. It's difficult to get things taken seriously or things changed, because you're in a tiny minority and no one else is speaking up for you. So, I mean, the best you can really hope to do is to try and question the witnesses in a different way. to the way that they might be questioned by other people on the committee. But yeah, no, it's tough. It's tough, but it's you know, I can't say it's the most enjoyable part of my job, being on the Women and Equalities Select Committee. You know, should I be on there? I don't know. Would the other people on the committee wish I weren't on there? But almost certainly, I would say, which might be a reason why it's best to stay on there. So I don't know. So it is difficult, but I do try occasionally and put a few flies in the ointment. But that's really the best you can do. You're never going to change the viewpoint or the standpoint of the committee as a whole. It's an impossible task.
Philip, we really appreciated your criticisms of all-women shortlists in your debate last Thursday. One problem with them, obviously, with the all-women shortlist, is that we end up with feminists such as Jess Phillips in Parliament. Would you agree that that's a dreadful consequence of the shortlists and a strong argument for their abolition?
No, not in itself. I mean, look, I don't have a problem with feminists being in Parliament. There are feminists out in the country, and they deserve representation in Parliament. Absolutely, that's perfectly reasonable. So I don't have a problem with feminists being in Parliament and speaking up in Parliament. I think that's good. I think for a Parliament to work, a parliamentary democracy to work, everybody in the country's got to feel that somebody in there speaking up for them. And therefore it's absolutely right that feminists out in the country feel that people are speaking up for them in Parliament. I've got no problem with that. And I don't have a problem with Jess Phillips holding the views that she does. She's just as entitled to her views as I am entitled to mine, even though they don't particularly coincide. But you know, my problem with women-only shortlists is that I don't think gender should be important when you're electing people to Parliament. I don't think actually the voters care about people's gender, they care about what they believe in. You know, and so just as no doubt, I can't believe Jess Phillips was full of bursting with pride when Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister, but I was. So I don't think gender's actually that important. And you know, I just don't believe that people should be selected solely based on their gender. I just don't see what relevance it has, and you end up with the perverse situation where people who are, you know, hard-working people in their local community who happen to be men are excluded from standing for a seat that they might well be the perfect person to stand. And the other thing is that I really don't understand is why on earth anybody thinks that an upper class, privately educated, wealthy woman needs support and things tilted in their favour to get elected to Parliament, but a working class bloke doesn't. I would have thought the exact opposite, to be perfectly honest. And I don't really think that, I've always maintained that replacing Rupert from Kensington and Chelsea with Henrietta from Kensington and Chelsea doesn't really do a fat lot for diversity in Parliament, to be perfectly honest. So, you know, I don't see, I just think this obsession with any kind of positive discrimination, I don't believe in any kind of positive discrimination, because it is what it says, discrimination. And I just think everyone should be treated equally, and everybody should get to Parliament on the same basis. There shouldn't be people who are here on one basis and people who are here on another basis. We should all be here on an equal footing, and we're not at the moment.
No.
Linked to that last question, only 7% of British people identify as feminists, according to the Fawcett Society, yet many female MPs in particular seem to be more committed to pursuing feminist goals than representing their constituents. They appear not to give a damn about the human rights of men and boys or the well-being of the nuclear family. Do you think it might be possible to mobilise voters against feminist zealotry so they stop electing these people, these radicals, as MPs?
Perhaps. I mean, I think the feminists, there's two, I think feminists generally are overrepresented in Parliament, and not just by the women MPs as well, I might add. But I think they are overrepresented compared to the public as a whole. I mean, I think Parliament is completely out of step with public opinion on virtually everything. It's very difficult to find any issue on which Parliament is in step with public opinion. We know for a fact that it wasn't on the EU, whereas you've got the overwhelming number of MPs who want to be in the EU, and obviously the majority voted to leave, but it's the same on virtually everything. Crime, feminism, no doubt, you know, how much we spend on overseas aid, all these things. The public are way ahead of the politicians on virtually every single issue, including this. But of course, there are two types of feminists. I always think. I think there are what I call sort of old-fashioned feminists who do genuinely believe in equality, and you know, as do I. And I don't have a particular problem with that. I think there's a modern type of what I call a feminist zealot who is not an old-fashioned feminist, but this sort of new extreme version who don't actually believe in equality. You know, they believe in discriminating against men, basically, and they take the view that women were discriminated against in the past, and therefore they want to reverse the discrimination and give men a taste of the medicine that they felt they had for so many years. And that's the bit that troubles me. And worryingly, there's an awful lot of those in Parliament too, and I think they are completely out of touch with the sentiment of most people in the country. And perhaps you know, the public need to have that highlighted to them, that actually what these people really do stand for is nothing to do. They masquerade as wanting equality, but actually they want anything but. They want equality when it suits them to have equality, but they want inequality when it suits them to have inequality too. And yeah, I think the public need to be better educated about that, because they portray themselves as something that they're not.
Philip, you've spoken on a number of occasions about MPs and peers supporting your position on equal rights, opportunities and treatment for men and boys, but they only do so in private, which I guess brings us back to the courage issue. But can you estimate what proportion of MPs have sympathy for your positions, and is there a party political angle to that?
It's difficult to know, because I haven't spoken to all of them, so it'd be very difficult to know. An awful lot of Conservative MPs have sympathy with what I say, and not just men. Some of the women Conservative MPs certainly do. And there's certainly a proportion of Labour MPs that do. How big it is, I'm not entirely sure, but there certainly is a proportion of Labour MPs who say to me that they absolutely agree with what they would be crucified in their own party were they to publicly say that or for it to be known. I mean, with all these things, there aren't enough, but there'll be more than people would expect. But you know, it makes no difference how many there are in private. It's pointless. I mean, they may as well be the fiercest opponents, to be perfectly honest, for what use they are.
Yes.
The only thing that counts are people who are prepared to put their head above the parapet and actually speak up and vote accordingly. And unfortunately, there are hardly any that are prepared to do that. And the reason they're not prepared to do it is because they see the custard pies that get thrown at people like me, and they think, well, why on earth would I volunteer for that? You know, it's easier to have a quiet life and not have all that. And you know, who's the stupid one? Me, probably, to be perfectly honest. You know, their life, you know, they make their decision is a perfectly rational one. They would think, well, why bother opening myself up to all of the abuse? It's completely unnecessary. I just won't bother.
And yet, in doing that, of course, they're not representing half their electors.
No, I don't think they are. I don't think they are representing maybe more than half their electors, in the sense that I think most people, you know, I think the things that I argue for are common sense that the overwhelming majority of people agree with. It's a very small vocal minority who make up for their lack of numbers by their vocal support for what they believe in, and the fact that they try and bully other people into believing it too. If they had a majority of people that support their opinion, they wouldn't need to do that.
No.
The reason, the fact that they're so vocal and try and bully people so much is a perfect indicator that they have a minority opinion, but they're determined to maximise it.
So it's not exactly democracy, is it? To make the obvious point.
No, it's not, but you know, at the end of the day, you know, I always say the silent majority in the country have got to stop being silent. And ultimately, I suppose, the public end up with the politicians they deserve. At the end of the day, they vote for them. It's no good the public complaining about the politicians they've got, because at the end of the day, the politicians are only there because they voted for them. So it's in the voters' hands, really, ultimately.
Is there anything you can tell us about your plans for the future?
No, not really. I suppose I'll carry on speaking out and saying what I think, and no doubt upsetting people in the process. But
We look forward to it.
I mean, I go back to what I said earlier on, which is that I think for Parliament to work, everybody's got to feel that somebody in there, at least one person's in there, speaking up for them. And you know, and I'm perfectly happy to speak up for unpopular causes and unfashionable causes. Because I think it's crucial in a democracy that there are people who speak up for those causes. When people feel there isn't anybody in Parliament who's speaking up for them, that's when they either don't vote at all, or they vote for extremist parties, or whatever. I think it's for parliamentary democracy to flourish. Everybody's got to feel that at least somebody's rooting for them and speaking up for what they want to have said. And if you know, if I can feel that somebody out there thinks, thank goodness for him speaking up and saying that, then brilliant. That's, you know, that's the only motivation I need. Because any old fool can trot out something that's easy to say and that's popular to say and that's fashionable to say. Anyone can do that. It doesn't need me to be in Parliament to do that. There's plenty of others who are happy to do that. I want to stand up and say things that I think lots of people in the country think, but nobody ever seems quite prepared to say in Parliament, and that's what I want to keep on doing.
Well, I can assure you, Philip, you have millions of supporters around the world. Philip, thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks.